What happens when the nation that built its entire identity around controlling a single strip of water suddenly wakes up to find itself locked out of it? Not by a massive bombing campaign, not by an invasion, but by a silent, invisible trap that nobody saw coming. Right now, in the waters of the Persian Gulf, a fleet of United States destroyers has just executed a maneuver so precise and so unexpected that it has left Iranian leadership completely paralyzed. Before we dive into how the US Navy just sealed 70 cargo ships in a masterclass of modern warfare, do one thing for me. If you want to actually understand the chess moves shaping our world instead of just scrolling past shallow headlines, hit subscribe right now. This channel is built to give you the real story happening behind closed doors. For over 40 years, Iran held the global economy hostage with one simple threat. Push us too far and we will choke the Strait of Hormuz. It was their ultimate weapon, the trump card they believed no one could ever take away. But this week, the United States didn't just call their bluff. They flipped the entire board upside down. They didn't bomb the strait. They didn't fire a single missile at the Iranian coastline. Instead, they quietly sealed the exits. Overnight, 70 massive cargo ships and tankers tied to the regime found themselves surrounded by American steel, with absolutely nowhere left for them to run or to hide. For months, military analysts expected this standoff to end the way they always do: jets in the sky, sirens in the dark, and missiles raining down on coastal radar sites. But bombing a country is loud, it is messy, and it is exactly what Iranian generals were prepared for. They spent decades burying their assets under mountains of solid rock, waiting for an air war. Instead, American forces did something far more dangerous. They changed the rules of the game completely. You do not win a chess match by smashing the board. You win by controlling the squares your opponent needs to survive. And that is exactly what the United States Navy just did. Washington did not try to force its way through the Strait of Hormuz. They did not try to pick a fight in the middle of a crowded international shipping lane. That would have caused global panic. Instead, American destroyers bypassed the main channel entirely. They moved silently into position and dropped a targeted, surgical blockade directly onto Iran's own ports. This single move left military leaders in Tehran absolutely stunned and completely outplayed. Think about the sheer brilliance of that strategy for a second. The US military effectively said, "The Strait of Hormuz is completely open for the entire world. Everyone can sail through safely, except you." By parking heavily armed destroyers right outside the maritime doorstep of Iranian loading docks, the United States turned Iran's ultimate weapon directly against them. The defiant regime that spent 40 long years threatening to lock the global economy out of the Persian Gulf is now the only nation on Earth trapped inside it. They did not need to drop a single bomb to shatter Tehran's master strategy. They just needed to park American steel exactly where it hurts. Picture what this actually looked like out on the water. For years, Iran relied heavily on a shadow fleet. This was a massive network of ghost tankers that constantly turned off their tracking transponders to smuggle oil out in the dead of night. These veteran ship captains were used to slipping past international patrols without making a single sound. But this time, when they tried to pull their usual trick, the entire ocean was waiting for them. Around 70 cargo ships and heavily loaded oil tankers suddenly found themselves caught in an unbreakable steel net. Imagine being a nervous captain on one of those ghost ships. You sail out of an Iranian port, heavy with illegal crude oil, truly thinking you are a total ghost on the radar. But as you hit the edge of the coastal waters, the horizon is not empty at all. It is blocked by the gray hulls of American destroyers. They are heavily armed, perfectly positioned, and waiting exactly where you desperately need to pass. There is nowhere left to run. You simply cannot fight them, and you certainly cannot outrun them. The sheer panic on those ship bridges must have been absolute. Radios were likely going crazy with frantic calls sent back to headquarters in Tehran, begging for military orders. But what could Tehran possibly say to help them? The United States Navy did not even need to fire a weapon. They just sat there on the water, acting as an impenetrable floating wall. 70 vessels, carrying the critical economic lifeblood of an entire regime, were instantly paralyzed. They suddenly became floating prisoners trapped inside their own territorial waters. This was not just a simple maritime traffic jam, it was a massive financial hostage situation, and the United States Navy held all the keys. Now, you might be wondering, why doesn't Iran just run to the United Nations and cry about illegal piracy? Why not rally the entire international community against the United States for breaking maritime law? Because the military planners in Washington did not just outsmart Tehran on the water. They completely outplayed them in the legal rulebook, and this is exactly where the absolute genius of this specific blockade really shines through. Under international maritime law, if the United States Navy had completely blocked the entire Strait of Hormuz, it would have been a massive legal disaster. Shutting down an international shipping lane is considered a highly illegal move. It would have instantly angered powerful American allies and turned the entire global community against Washington. But American commanders did not touch the international shipping lanes. They deliberately left the middle of the strait completely wide open. Instead, they enforced the blockade strictly around Iran's own sovereign ports and coastal waters. This created a brilliant and incredibly awkward legal loophole that paralyzed Iranian diplomats. When Iranian officials grabbed the microphones and frantically tried to accuse the United States of global piracy, the rest of the world simply looked confused. How can you complain about the global shipping lanes being blocked when ships from China, India, and Europe are sailing through them perfectly fine? The United States literally and legally isolated Iran without firing a single shot. They completely boxed them into a very tight corner where complaining just makes the regime look incredibly weak and foolish. By making sure every other nation could still get their oil, Washington smartly ensured that nobody else in the world had any reason to step in and help Tehran. It was a flawless diplomatic checkmate, perfectly trapping a hostile government inside a completely unbreakable legal cage. But if you think the American destroyers sitting heavily on the surface of the water are terrifying, you are missing the most dangerous part of this entire operation. Because the real nightmare for the Iranian military is hiding completely out of sight, operating silently just below the waves. Somewhere beneath the dark waters of the Persian Gulf, American nuclear attack submarines are actively patrolling. And here is the brutal truth that keeps Iranian naval commanders awake at night. They have absolutely no reliable way to detect them. Because of years of heavy sanctions and a lack of modern military technology, Iran's sonar and underwater detection systems are severely outdated. They are essentially blind underwater. Imagine being a young commander on a fast-attack Iranian patrol boat. Your superiors order you to speed out toward the blockade line to test the American defenses. You can see the massive gray warships on the horizon. But you also know that somewhere directly beneath your tiny boat, a multi-billion-dollar American submarine could be tracking your every single move. You cannot hear it, you cannot see it, you do not know if its highly advanced targeting systems are currently locked directly onto your hull. If you make one wrong move, or fire one reckless shot, your boat could simply disappear into the ocean before you even realize you are under attack. This invisible presence is a devastating psychological weapon. It does not even need to launch a single torpedo to be completely effective. Just the mere thought of those silent submarines lurking in the shadows forces the entire Iranian military into a state of total hesitation. It strips away their confidence, replaces it with raw paranoia, and ensures that absolutely no Iranian captain dares to cross that invisible, deadly line in the dark, freezing water. Let's talk about money, because if you really want to understand why this specific blockade is so incredibly dangerous for the Iranian regime, you have to look right past the military hardware and look directly at their bank accounts. Those 70 ships sitting paralyzed in the water are not just carrying barrels of crude oil, they are carrying the literal lifeblood of the entire Iranian government. To see the full picture, you have to understand how power actually works inside Iran. The clerics at the very top do not stay in power because the everyday citizens love them. They stay in power because a highly armed, deeply feared military organization called the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is always willing to violently crush any protests. But the Revolutionary Guard does not do this dirty work for free. They demand to be paid. Their salaries, their privileges, their weapons, and their massive business empires all run on one single thing: illegal oil money. When the United States Navy trapped those 70 tankers, they did not just stop maritime traffic. They aggressively reached out and cut the main financial artery keeping the regime alive. This is not just a rounding error on a spreadsheet. We are talking about hundreds of millions of dollars evaporating into thin air every single day those ships remain trapped. When a ruthless government suddenly runs completely out of cash, they are forced to make brutal, terrifying choices. Do they use whatever money is left to subsidize basic food for a starving, deeply angry population? Or do they use it to pay the heavily armed security forces keeping them safe? Usually, there is never enough cash left to do both of those things. A military blockade like this one does not destroy a government by blowing up its expensive buildings. It slowly and silently squeezes the financial foundation until the people holding the guns stop getting their daily paychecks. And history shows us that the very second a regime can no longer afford to buy the loyalty of its own guards, the entire system begins to inevitably collapse from the inside out. If you want to know exactly how much panic is happening inside Tehran right now, do not look at the water. Look at their television screens, because the way the Iranian government is publicly responding to this massive blockade reveals a deeply embarrassing truth. Shortly after the American destroyers locked down those 70 ships, Iranian state media suddenly released dramatic, highly produced animated videos. These bizarre CGI cartoons showed American aircraft carriers being violently blown up and sunk by overwhelming Iranian missile strikes. On the surface, it just looks like silly, typical wartime bravado, but think about who that fake video is actually for. It is certainly not meant to scare the United States military. Nobody sitting inside the Pentagon changes their naval strategy because of a cheap cartoon. Military commanders rely on real satellite data, not fantasy animations. So, who is the real target audience? The Iranian people. This propaganda is a desperate message aimed entirely inward. The regime is dealing with a population that is watching their life savings evaporate, their economy collapse, and their government look completely helpless against the American Navy. The leaders cannot show the actual footage of their 70 most valuable cargo ships, trapped and paralyzed by American destroyers. That would look incredibly weak. So, they show them a completely fake victory instead. They need the terrified public to believe the regime is still strong, still powerful, and still in total control of the situation. But in modern geopolitics, the louder and more fake the propaganda becomes, the more it actually reveals the sheer panic happening behind closed doors. When a military force truly has the absolute power to destroy its enemies, it does not make animated cartoons. It takes real action. Cartoons are what you use when reality is entirely working against you. For years, Iran's naval strategy relied heavily on one specific terrifying tactic: the swarm. They built hundreds of small, cheap, and incredibly fast attack boats. The logic was brutal but simple. If they rushed a single large warship with 50 armed speedboats at the exact same time, the ship's radar and defenses would eventually get overwhelmed. It is the military equivalent of a massive, deadly bee sting. But that outdated strategy is completely useless against the heavy American destroyers currently holding this blockade. Why? Because the United States Navy operates on a completely different technological level. These modern destroyers are equipped with the Aegis combat system. This is not just a radar or a weapon. It is a highly advanced, fully integrated digital brain. It instantly connects every single ship, aircraft, and hidden submarine into one massive shared network. If just one American destroyer detects an incoming Iranian drone or a fast attack boat, that target data is instantly transmitted to every other ship in the entire fleet in a matter of milliseconds. They do not fight as isolated, lonely ships on the water. They fight as one massive, connected, and highly lethal organism. If an Iranian swarm tries to aggressively rush one specific section of the blockade, the entire American fleet instantly knows their exact speed, direction, and precise threat level long before they even get close to striking range. This flawless network technology makes the classic Iranian swarm tactic entirely obsolete. It is the exact difference between trying to blindside a single lonely security guard and trying to boldly attack a guard who instantly alerts a massive, heavily armed SWAT team the exact second you step onto the property. Iran's cheap speedboats are now totally outmatched by America's invisible, unbreakable digital net. It is incredibly easy to get entirely lost in the brilliant military tactics, the advanced radar systems, and the trapped oil tankers. But we cannot forget the most explosive element of this entire geopolitical chess match: the human element. Because while the wealthy clerics and senior military generals sit comfortably in their highly secure mansions in Tehran, it is the everyday citizens who are taking the absolute hardest hit from this silent blockade. Iran is a nation of nearly 90 million people. Millions of ordinary families, who have absolutely nothing to do with the reckless military decisions made by their government, are currently waking up to a terrifying economic nightmare. When 70 massive cargo ships are completely frozen in the water, the national economy does not just slow down, it crashes hard. Food prices skyrocket instantly. Basic, life-saving medicines become incredibly scarce. The local currency loses its value so incredibly fast that people watch their entire life savings completely evaporate right in front of their eyes. This creates a massive, extremely dangerous disconnect inside the country. The regime constantly prioritizes funding their proxy militias and their nuclear ambitions, while their own citizens cannot even afford to buy basic groceries. A naval blockade like this cuts incredibly deep, precisely because it perfectly targets that exact massive gap between the rulers and the ruled. History has proven time and time again that a corrupt government can usually survive a few targeted airstrikes. But a government rarely survives when its entire population reaches the absolute boiling point of sheer desperation and hunger. American military planners know this perfectly well. They are not just squeezing the Iranian navy, they are actively turning the entire country into a massive internal pressure cooker, simply waiting for the exact moment the lid finally blows completely off. Let's look at the absolute most embarrassing strategic mistake the Iranian military has made so far. Early in this tense conflict, long before the 70 cargo ships were trapped, Iranian naval forces really tried to be clever. They secretly planted deadly sea mines all across the northern parts of the Strait of Hormuz. Their ultimate goal was to aggressively terrify the world. They wanted to make the water so incredibly dangerous that massive international shipping companies would panic and beg the United States to back down. But that highly reckless plan backfired in the most spectacular way imaginable. Those hidden sea mines did not scare the powerful American Navy away. Instead, they accidentally completely changed the entire traffic pattern of the global shipping lane, because the northern routes near the Iranian coastline were suddenly filled with highly dangerous explosives. Every single international commercial ship immediately shifted their routes far to the south. They moved much closer to the safe, friendly coastline of Oman. And guess who perfectly patrols that exact southern corridor? The United States Navy. By aggressively mining their own territorial waters, Iranian generals practically handed complete control of the vital strait directly over to the American fleet. They essentially pushed all the valuable international traffic straight into the absolute safest possible zone, perfectly guarded by heavily armed American destroyers. This massive mistake left the northern waters completely empty, perfectly isolating Iran's own ports even further. It is the ultimate strategic irony. Every single desperate attempt Iran makes to loudly assert its dominance just ends up making the United States Navy's job so much easier. They effectively locked the front door of their own house from the outside, threw the heavy key perfectly into the dark ocean, and now act completely shocked that they simply cannot get back inside. So, where does this incredibly dangerous standoff actually go from here? We are currently watching a massive, high-stakes waiting game play out in real time. The United States Navy is sitting perfectly still, heavily armed, and holding absolute control over Iran's economic survival. Iran is trapped, bleeding millions of dollars every single day, and dealing with a deeply furious population that is rapidly losing all its patience. But a silent blockade is never truly peaceful. It is simply a very quiet kind of war. And the absolute biggest danger sitting underneath this entire situation is the terrifying risk of a single, simple miscalculation. One young, nervous Iranian captain deciding to prove a point and firing a shot at an American destroyer. One warning shot from a US submarine that accidentally hits a real target. One desperate drone strike from a proxy militia that actually manages to get past the American digital net. In a massive standoff this incredibly tense, a single spark does not just start a small fire, it instantly ignites the entire region. We are standing right on the absolute edge of a historical tipping point. The weapon Iran once proudly pointed at the global economy is still there, but the hand holding that weapon has completely changed. Control of the Persian Gulf has silently and decisively shifted. If this deep breakdown helped you finally understand the real chess moves happening behind the global headlines, do exactly what this channel is built for. Hit subscribe right now, share this specific video with that one friend who needs the actual full picture, and drop a comment below. Who do you think is going to blink first in this dangerous waiting game? Washington or Tehran? I read every single comment, and I will truly see you in the next deep dive.